Jason, thank you very much, and thank you, Sync Canada, for giving me this opportunity. Good afternoon, everyone. I am told that by the end of this presentation, we will know who is going to be the next president of the United States. So somehow your vote is going to count. Hopefully, we will know that, we'll test that at the end, Jason, whether actually this will be true. But anyway, so welcome again. The talk for this afternoon will be APSA and signature culture. So we will explore that, what that means. So maybe a little about myself, 30 years in IT, a former chief enterprise architect and CISO for Financial Services Commission. I've been teaching 23 years at Ryerson University, 8 years at the University of Toronto, and recently hired last year at York University to develop a course in cloud computing. I've been teaching in various disciplines: enterprise architecture, security, privacy, accessibility, service management, information management, project management, governance management, and cloud computing. You have my contact information. Please free to connect, and I do give lunch and learns for various organizations. I'll be happy to do that for your enterprise as well. So the agenda for this afternoon. So we're going to look at what perspective is about and strategy, how these two are connected. And following this, we get into the APSA mindset, which is architecture, privacy, security, and accessibility. And what is that mindset we're talking about? Following that, we're going to talk about the signature, a little to play on my signature. It's all about the notion of service management, information management, and governance management. And I'm going to end up in telling you a few insights, sharing with you. So let's talk a little first about what I call perception, and we're going to talk about that perception here. So I remember in my doing marketing 101, I was told that there are 4 P's of marketing, 4 P's of marketing. And I'm sure you remember: place, promotion, price, product. And I remember the instructor at that time said that there is a 5th P of marketing, and he calls it the phantom P, the P that is invisible but yet very powerful, and he called it perception. And that for many years ago was something that was important for me, and I realized that perception is what drives the understanding of things. And sometimes if you understand someone's perception, then you would be able to understand what is behind the person's attitude, behavior, or even decision. And I always make it a point, when I meet with senior executive, to find out what is the phantom P and what is something that the person will perceive through their communication. So for me, the first rule of perspective is perception. And basically, when we talk about perspective, is what you're seeing, what you're looking, and looking through. And the opinion sometimes is based on what you see, on what you look. I remember one time we had a data breach, and we were just talking, and with the senior executive, I realized that many people, when they hear data breach, they think about different things, and they perceive a breach different ways. So it is important to understand that. In one of the definition of perspective, it says it's the art of making sense of object in spatial dimension. And this is where I'm going to take you through briefly these perspectives. I mean, I'm sure you have seen something in 2D, most probably very flat, where you look at length and width, just 2 dimensions. Or we have seen something as a cube in 3 dimensions, in 3D. Now we have TVs with 3D, otherwise TV was just 2D. Just as an aside, you may perhaps wonder but what would be 1D? What would be a perspective of 1D, or one dimension? And I remember I answered my student, I said, well, you know that sometimes many people have, you know, like tunnel vision or narrow-minded. I would say that would be 1D. And unfortunately, we do have a number of those, and they do not help to have people that are tunnel vision or really are very narrow-minded. But the idea is to have a vision that is open. So we know that length and width and height will change the shape of an object. But what would be the fourth dimension? And I was doing some research, and I always liked TV. There was a TV show called Time Tunnel. I'm sure many of you may remember, and there has been a lot of movies about time machine, Back to the Future, and so forth. And I believe that time actually would change the shape of things, and is the fourth dimension, is the dimension of time. So as time goes by, I mean, you think about that, as we get more experience, we go older, we learn more things, and our perception of things will change. So we have a different perspective as we move into the years. And when events happen to us time after time, our perspective will change. So let me then talk about 5D. Well, anybody would think about what would be the fifth dimension. In my opinion, the fifth dimension is the dimension of the mind. I don't know whether you remember the movie The Matrix, when at some time Neo was visiting the Oracle, and he saw a boy that was able to bend a spoon by just holding the spoon. I don't know whether this is a trick. I know some magician can do that, and they tell you it is a power of the mind. But I do believe that in our own enterprise, we, with the power of our own mind, we can change things. We are change agents based on the power of our mind. So our mind is a very powerful instrument that we can learn to explore and develop further. So the other perspective then is the 5D, which is the power of the mind. So that's perspective. So let's look at strategy. I don't know whether you are a chess player, but I would say if you are, a chess game is a game of strategy. I don't think one can say, I was able to win this game of chess based on luck. I mean, I don't think luck plays a lot in a game of chess, especially if you're dealing with professional players. So what would be then the single element of strategy in a game of chess? I would say to anticipate. And that's what basically we do in a game of chess, to anticipate the move of the opponent. But since there are two opponents, both of them would anticipate each other. So that is why I would define strategy rather as anticipate to the square. Okay, so what do I mean anticipate to the square? I wrote it down because it is a little mouthful, and here it is. So anticipate to the square means to anticipate what your opponent is anticipating about your anticipation. To anticipate what your opponent is anticipating about your anticipation. And you can see it becomes a game of anticipation. The furthest you can go in anticipating the moves of your opponent, the better it is, the better it becomes your strategy. So what can we say? Strategy is insight. And you might say, well, what is insight? And I've given you a couple of words, what insight might mean: intuition, your perception, understanding of something, awareness, all right, consciousness, discernment, the flair of acumen. Many of these are very important elements in today's business. So what I would like to share with you next is what I call an eyesight perspective model, where the focus is understanding of insight. First of all, insight is a byproduct of two things. Hindsight, often we say hindsight is 2020, right? You base on the history and learning, but also it is important to consider foresight, the ability to see further in the future. So the past and the future comes together, right? Because sometimes the future may be a reenactment of the past. So we learn from each of them. So you need to see insight as a product of both hindsight and foresight. One other element to be added to insight, there are two things for those who are familiar with farsighted and nearsighted. One of them you can see far, but you cannot see near. The other one you can see near, but you cannot see far. But the proper insight is to be able to bring the two together. And this is where you play on focusing. And for those who are photographers, you know there's something called depth of field, where you are able to blur the background so as the foreground becomes in perspective, or you can do the reverse, blur the foreground and the background being in focus. So that technique is what will bring focus to your insight. So all these elements blends together for you to get the right oversight, which is a governance model to be able to think, to be able to apply. And this model, I am going to use this model to apply to the APSA mindset and the signature I am about to tell you. So just keep that eyesight perspective model, so as whenever you're presented with something, whether in the boardroom or trying to analyze something, remember insight is just one thing. It is a matter of different elements to be brought together. So then what would be the APSA mindset? Okay, how we are able to now apply that in the real world, in the real things we have to do. So APSA, it stands for architecture, and this is the first thing that we look at as an enterprise, and I call that the design and management of complexities, even of change, of anything that happens. You look at the design of things, and that's what the perspective of the architect. Now, I'm sure many of you, if you're an architect, or you may have to work with architects, but just to tell you that the architects, that's their perception, that's what is important, and that's what they do, the design and management of complexities of change. And also, one of the key elements is that they are responsible for ensuring alignment between the key components of the enterprise, so as all these elements will be aligned to each other. And the other side of the APSA is the notion of privacy. And privacy has become important for the last 5 years, and with the GDPR and California, so all these needs to be important. You would see that I wrote privacy a little space, because I want to tell you, look at the word privacy, what is at the center of privacy? At the center of privacy is the letter V that you see here. The letter V. Now, why is this important? And the letter V, if I break it down, it would be two letters I. I stands for information or sometimes we talk about PII, personally identifiable information. Why these two I? Well, privacy requires balance, the balance of the I, the balance of the information about the individual, how much would be shared, how much will be set at the confidential. Privacy is always a balancing act. And so it is important to understand that focus of privacy, whether you do privacy by design, but remember, it is embedded in the fabric of the enterprise. So the next is security. And of course, you cannot have, good privacy without a good security. Security is as important as privacy. And one thing, I've been to a number of conferences, like past 10 years, 15 years, and I have been attending privacy conferences and security conferences. One thing I noticed that about, 5, 6 years ago, when I go to these conferences, I never see people that I have met in the other conference. The privacy conferences were mostly maybe managers, policy people, a few IT, and security were mostly IT people. And in privacy conferences, they just talk about privacy and policies. And of course, security was all about security. But in the last 2 to 3 years, what we have been seeing is that in privacy conferences, there's a talk about security. And in the security conferences, you have a talk about privacy. Somehow, these two now realize the existence of each other. They are like two sides of the same coin. And now I'm seeing people, I say, oh, I saw you at the security conference, so now you are in the privacy conference. And we are seeing people, so never separate these two, they are together. So just like I asked the question about what is at the center of the word security, so I'm sure if you look at the center of the word security, the answer is you are. You are, I am, we all are at the center of security. All right, and that's one thing I always convey the message in the Security Awareness Month, that you are at the center. I play a little game on that. That's what I showed people, to tell them that they are at the center of security. So one thing about security, just two things I want to tell you is one thing that I have done as my security portfolio is divide security into what I call the business of security and the technology of security. Because when you speak with senior executive, you cannot just talk about the technology of security. You need to be more business focused. And that's the type of mindset. It was the business of security and technology of security. And finally, in Canada, I'm sure many of you are aware that accessibility is very important, and we need to start building accessibility in the design of whatever we do. And because accessibility is basically inclusivity and respect, very important. So that's the mindset. All four together in one. So as when we talk about these elements, we don't talk about these as if they were separate, because in every event or can be a breach, all these four might be affected. Okay, so now it's time for you to do a quick check, a quick test. So I'm going to ask the question. So I'm going to show you a diagram, and let's see what you can come up with. All right, so the question is simple. How many squares do you see? Okay, so
we don't have a poll here, guys, so please use the chat feature. Just type in there as you see fit.
Yeah, let's see. Good.
Nice.
All right,
yeah,
so I can see you all have seen develop the mindset. Yes. Okay, so obviously the trick here, most people might say, hey, I can see 4 squares here. But the square that perhaps was the invisible, was the big square that would include all four together, the fifth. And that's the idea, is that don't just see these as just one square. Of course, they all have their peculiarities that needs to be looked at, but you need to see them in one box. When you are going to address the executive, all right, component-wise, you know, might be quite of a difficulty, because when you get breach, whether it is security breach, privacy, it is a breach, and you pay the consequences of the breach. So from the minds of the executive, the whole enterprise will be affected. So I'm glad that many of you look for 5, and I'm sure one can come up with other examples too. Okay, so that's the APSA mindset. And so let's look at the signature, or the nature of the SIG, and why is that important, and why this signature will complement the APSA mindset. So the first letter, S, stands for service management. And why is that important? What is happening today is that everything is being shifted to a service paradigm. Everything is in terms of a service. Even if we produce widgets, the widgets will be how it will be able to service the customer. Everything is translated in terms of what the service. And what I have seen in for the past a few years in many of the certification, many of them are being rewritten, and ITIL is one of them. We have now the ITIL version 4. It's all about that shift to service. And soon the PMI, project management, will be releasing their new PMBOK, and I wouldn't be surprised that the concept of value and service will be prominent in what they are going to expose to the people who would like to get the certification. So the service management is about, you know, the implementation management of the quality IT services. And we all know that's what is our own aspiration, to make sure IT services would be. You know, quite recently, my favorite actor, Sean Connery, died. And I remember a very, very long time ago when I saw my first James Bond and OHMS one on Her Majesty's Service, okay? And that struck me, saying, well, I am service. Every one of you, we are service. Our name is service. We represent a service. We provide services to our clients. So we are service, and hopefully maybe we won't be James Bond, but we'll be on her, whoever's a Majesty's service, or on her customer service, or whoever it will be applied. So service management. So information management, I often refer to that as the invisible gem, because in many organizations, we all know that the important asset is all about data, and we manage information not very well. I remember the time when SharePoint came along, where Microsoft said, you know what, we are going to eliminate the network drive, and SharePoint would be the solution. And guess what happened? I remember we implemented the SharePoint, and it was so easy. So we have, like, basically everybody was SharePoint crazy. And guess what happened? The network drive is still around, and now we have to deal with SharePoint and the network drive. So, so the management of information, I don't think we have mastered that yet to a level that we say we know what we have, but it is something that we need to continue. And the amount of information we generate is just not going to go down. It is just going to increase. Last but not least, what I consider perhaps a very important is the notion of governance. Governance management has become an essential element in whatever we do. So governance, and my understanding of governance, is two very important A, assurance and accountability, very important. But one thing here, governance is not policing. I know that when I was part of governance, sometimes people think that governance is about giving check mark. Okay, Claude, you know, in the meeting, remember, give us a check mark. And then I realized, I'm sorry, but I'm not here to give check mark. Okay, I'm here to make sure that things will be done according to certain standards. And I gave you that example of landing lights. Actually, during a summer, I was walking by the university, and it was at the varsity stadium. And I remember I saw a hurdles race, and they were like hurdles this way, right? And then you, for those who remember, you have people trying to go and jump over the hurdles. And then the idea came to me. I said, well, this is what people think that governance is, that I put the hurdles and then people have to jump over it. And of course, people do not want to jump over hurdles and hurdles and hurdles. And they think that you are not helping them to go from one place to the other. You are placing the hurdles in front of them and they need to jump over the hurdles. And that's not a very good notion. So I remember one day I just, in a diagram, I took the hurdles. I said, okay, you think that governance is about jumping the hurdles? I said, okay. I said, give me a moment. Let me rearrange the hurdles. And this is what I did. So I said the hurdles, I put the hurdles this way. And I think this is where the person is. And I said, the hurdles now are like boundaries to help you, and your path is clear. And in fact, the hurdles will help you, will provide you with a direction of knowing where to go. And I gave them an example where hurdles of that could be used, just like landing lights. When you need to land an airplane in the dark, what do? You have these lights. These lights are not hurdles. They are your guiding lights to take you from point A to B. Anyway, so that's the signature. Very briefly, we are coming to the end. I just want to share with you insight, the definition of insight. And sometimes when we think about insight, insight has nothing to do with sight. Just like the bat. The bat doesn't, they are blind, and yet they do not collide with each other. I'm sure if you take a group of bats flying over 401, they're not going to hit each other. However, you take a group of humans on 401, I am sure you will get some accident at some time, unfortunately. So what is the symbol BAT stands for? So here we go. So the first B is the capacity to see beyond, just like a telephoto that will be able to see very far. You bring the image close to you, the capacity to see beyond. And that is very important because people, executive needs to have the great vision to be able to see beyond the future. Right now, one of the strategy, can we see beyond COVID-19? What would be the life after COVID-19? Are we able to see what needs to be adjusted post-COVID-19? That's the capacity to see beyond. Next, A, the capacity to see across. Across is this ability, wide angle. And this is where you have people, when you are able to see across, you're able to take into consideration as many thoughts you can. Many people just pick one or two. No, you need to be able to be very consultative, bring the opinion as many people to understand. So that's the capacity to see across. That's another way to be insightful. And T stands for the capacity to see through. That's the X-ray vision. I don't have an X-ray vision, but the idea is, can you read between the lines? Can you see through something? And many people have that ability. They can see through certain things, certain events, and that's the capacity. That's the BAT principle. So in conclusion, I would like to share with you my top 10 insight pearls. Number one, always show up. For me, this has been a driving force. Quite often, people do not show up. And this is very disappointing when you expect somebody to be there and they do not show up. Or on the other hand, if somebody would show up, you feel so grateful for the presence of each other. So please show up. And thank you for, by the way, showing up for this session. Second, first contact. I know right now with the pandemic, a first contact may not be possible face-to-face, physically. I always like when I work with vendors, I always require that we have first contact. So don't just talk to me on the phone, but can we meet for coffee somewhere? I always value a physical presence as the first contact. And that was the theme of the Star Trek, first contact. Number three, count to 10 before you start to speak. Well, I'm sure you know that one. I know for some people, I would say count to 100, but generally, we need to learn to listen first before we speak. Next, listen to what the person is not saying. And that is tough because sometimes people cannot say things brightly, or they are having difficulty to express themselves, to share their emotion, but try to listen. If you do communication well, you would be able to hear what the person is not saying. Perhaps they won't use words, their body language might convey to you the real message. Now, this one, I always heard, people have agenda. And what I have learned, I said, we need to watch out people with agenda. As also, people without agenda, I find that it is also can be very complicated. So, what do you partner with? I typically partner with people that can change the agenda. These are the people that show flexibility, that you give them a good argument, they're willing to change the agenda or have an agenda. 6, you may have heard that, make I statement, not you. Every time you start your statement by saying you, I mean, think about that. Somebody starts saying that you did that, that is sort of a blame culture. So I statement is about accountability, taking ownership for what I am doing. This one, you have heard about that, talk the talk and also walk the talk, but I'm going to give you one, be the talk. Be the talk. So as the person look at you saying, yes, you are being the talk, you are whatever you say you are. So this is authenticity and integrity in one person if you can do that. Number 8, listen to your inner voice. I believe that we have something in us that says something good. We need to learn to listen. And I always feel that attitude and gratitude will take you to the greatest altitude, okay? If you want to go high, well, have a good attitude and have gratitude. And finally, something that I wish all you can do something new every month. Do something, or even eat a new fruit. Try something new. Even if you don't like it, I'm not saying to do it, then you can try it. It's about trying. It's about trying something new to open up the great potential that is built in every person. So thank you again for your presence, for your attention, and for your steady support. Well, you pass. That's what the acronym says. Thank you again for your attention.
Absolutely excellent stuff. Thank you very much, Claude. Wow, some really incredible ways in which you just take real life experiences and place them into the business and technical world. And I think, quite frankly, everyone falls foul of getting too bogged down in the technical nature of things and forgets to just take that very simplistic life into the business world as well. So thank you very much for that. We do have time for some questions here. I have some questions myself. We have a couple of questions from the audience as well. So starting off with Lindsay Boguski. Thank you, Lindsay, for being so attentive during the sessions and asking the questions. First and foremost, well presented, Claude. Second, with all the insights and perspectives a functional team can offer, sometimes we still find ourselves stuck in a pattern or group think. What tactics can you offer to identify and overcome this phenomenon?
Okay, so I think the first thing, sometimes we have the pressure of the group. And I mentioned earlier is about the people's perception of things. Try to uncover what people perceive. And that you can find by asking different questions, can be very trivial. Sometimes people will play games and you see people exhibit a lot of their perception in very trivial games or trivial answer. And one thing that I have done is tell people whether they do crossword puzzles because they reveal themselves a lot. And it is sometimes a long process of documentation. I did that with my own boss just to get to know him a little better so as I can see where he's coming from. But sometimes you don't know and you ask the question or you give something very trivial. In fact, in one case, I took pizza. I said, I have to order pizza for the group. What is your recommendation? Something that will not commit the person to very sensitive, but something very simple, and find out what are some of the issues. And in fact, one thing I remember I asked the question, do you think we need to put vegetarian? Should it be 50-50 or 60-20? What do you think? Okay, so you force the person, and the person will never, don't reveal that I'm trying to trick you here to get to know what's your attitude or your perception, but give them the question and see what rationale, because they will use the same methodology they use for other things. It's just now you're picking up the items and be able to do that more. And you need to build that on over a number of things in order to pick that up.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Another question for you. So you mentioned about the business side of security and the technical side of security. So do you often see a lot of organizations or business leaders or even security leaders really just completely neglecting that business side? Is that a very common occurrence?
Yes. In fact, one of the first thing when I started as the chief cybersecurity, and when I started with my boss and my boss, it was all about, okay, so how about authentication? What are you going to do about authentication? What are you going to do about the server? It's all about all these technical security elements. And I went back to first principle. Then we had a discussion and I said, what do you think is the most important thing in security? And I learned that in my courses, and what do you think? And I said, how about saving lives? Where did that come from? I said, well, safety of people are important. We have all these rules, all right? And so you start getting people, and I remember I did an awareness in security, and I played on that thing that I showed you, what is at the center of security. And the answer was you are. So I did a little graphic, and you joke around with things and bring people to understand that security has different layers. And one of the first important layer is the business of security, not the technology of security. And where you put emphasis on understanding the rules and the policies, and that is the upper layer of the organization. So this was my conversation with the senior executive, and that's how I managed to get an invitation to talk about the business of security, not the technology. They don't care about the technology because they trust you. And I remember I needed, to get some funding. Guess what? I never talk about the technology. It was all about why I need it. And then I remember one of the executives said to me, Claude, I trust you on the details, but I need to know why you need that. what would that mean to the enterprise? That's what they mean. And I cannot explain that into authentication or whatever it is. It was safety, security of our data. That's how it has been, I expressed that.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much. Question here from Mario, a great question as well, is comments find that most folks who work in certain areas have blinders on in regards to the bigger picture and what should be done. It's a you problem, not a me problem situation. How do you suggest we introduce the eyesight solution of being able to view the larger picture to our colleagues?
Yeah, I mean, one way, I remember in one of the meeting with the executive, and as I enter the room, I mean, it was somewhat depressing. They say, hey, here's another IT guy coming in, okay? So I said, that must not sound right, another IT guy. And in fact, they was wondering, why am I here to tell them how to run the business? So, so not very good invitation remarks. So I said to them, I said, you know what? Why don't you give me 10 minutes? I promise you, I'm not going to talk anything about IT. My words, my thoughts will all be business. Can you, allow me to speak to that? And that's one thing in our own language. Sometimes we use technical terms just because it comes so easily and it is the first thing that I think of. And this is a temptation that I have, and I have had to really focus my mind not to use any technical jargon in speaking with managers about the business of something. So for security, one thing that I did, take them how security can be applied to their own household. So I said to them, if you have been to people's house you invite, what would be the first thing that kids visiting you will ask you first? What is your Wi-Fi password? Okay, so not even a good morning or good evening, they want to know the password. And then, they start, talking to each other. So I bring the conversation in their own homes, with their own children, their own families. So you bring that understanding of security, not at the server level of so you shift their mind. This is the process by which you bring their minds to be more open-minded. And that's where, I mean, it's not that there is any magic trick, but it takes time to bring the conversation outside of the office using example, because even as executive, they have families and they have to take care of their own security, even in their own home. That's where I bring the discussion outside of work and then bring it back so as they can apply. Oh, I understand now, because that Wi-Fi, that router works this way. Good.
Makes perfect sense. We're out of time, but I have one more question for you, just for the benefit of the people who are able to attend and watch this session, and those who have the ability to go and watch this in the on-demand capacity. What is the one thing that you recommend they can go away and do tomorrow to really start embracing this particular mindset and culture?
Yeah. So I think is to give yourself 10 minutes for yourself. Every morning or at night, find that time, give it to you. Look at yourself in the mirror or selfie or whatever you want, or look at your picture and then ask yourself, okay, what value my name is associated with? Give yourself a name that would be of value. Okay, would it be gratitude? Okay, would it be maybe generosity? Whatever, give your name a value. We are all people of value. We all say that we want to create value for our customers, but look at yourself. You are a bunch of value elements. I would say find your value name and then make it happen.
Amazing answer. And Peter Holoka has just mentioned in the chat feature exactly what I was just about to say. This was the perfect end to the conference. What a fantastic session. Really, really appreciate that. What an eye-opening experience, really, just on how we can start doing so much more, not even the working world, in your personal life, in everything. Like really, really good. Yes, Lindsay, I'm going to clap for you here as well. So on behalf of all the attendees, there's a virtual round of applause for Claude. Thank you so much.